Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're here today to talk research practitioner industry partnerships. My name is Rebecca Banks, and I'm with a nonprofit organization called Digital Promise. We work at the intersection of research and education and technology products. I'm really delighted to meet with you all today and have my panelists here. Immediately to my left is Gus Schmedlen. He is the President and Chief Revenue Officer for Merlyn Mind. Further down the line, we have Tameka Cooper. She's an educator of 16 years. She is currently an instructional coach and staff development teacher in Maryland. She's also a practitioner advisory board member for Merlyn Mind. Next to her, we have Steve Isaacs, who is the education program manager at Epic Games. Steve was also an educator for 28 years before making the shift. And finally, at the end of the line, we have Dr. Kylie Pepler, who is a professor of informatics and education at UC Irvine. She's also the director of Creativity Labs. She was part of the launch team at Scratch, which I know that she'll be happy to share her experience with, but as most of us know, they've made massive impacts in the classroom. So welcome everyone today. Like I said, we're going to talk about research practitioner industry partnerships. And so I guess probably the obvious question is to start off, and I'm going to start off with you, Dr. Peppler. What is a research practitioner industry partnership?
Wonderful question. Well, there's a huge need, right? When we look at all three sectors, we got the research sector, we've got industry, and we've also got practitioners and educators. And there's a need for us to come together as a community, both in our processes of how we design new ed tech, but also as we start to kind of envision the future of what this could be. And so in our PIP, and a research practice industry partnership, is really about how can we start to work together. And we don't need to invent this time after time. From the Scratch days starting in 2004 to present, when we have the mix of sort of industry knowledge together with sort of the research learnings and the educator insights, we can really design at that center of innovation.
So I have to ask our educators, Tameka and Steve, you probably are familiar through your years of experience. What happens when this isn't implemented well? What do you see? I'll start with you, Tameka. No need to name names, incidentally, but please share.
This is on. Okay, so I'm thinking of a time where had this very reputable district, very reputable ed tech company, and they had an affiliation together. But they didn't understand each other's outcomes. They weren't aligned. They both were striving to provide students with access, but they just didn't know the particulars about what they were trying to do well enough. So on the onset of onboarding, it was even, difficult because you have those apprehensive educators. What is this? So you have that part of the program that you need to implement. But then, because they were not aligned with their outcomes, it was like these barriers to completing the onboarding process. For example, the district super sensitive about student security, as they should. But this ed tech company's like, oh, well, we want the students to have full autonomy and do this and that and that. And the district's like, nope, too restrictive. Like, we need to shut it down. So you need to make sure both entities fully understand what they're actually trying to do.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little to that. But what I found, and I actually want to throw students into the equation as well. I feel like students and educators are, the customer of an ed tech company, right? When I, was teaching, so I took an approach where if my students were using a certain product, I wanted to get involved with that company, mainly because I wanted to inform decisions. I wanted to help, get in feature requests. It was, maybe, I don't know if it was selfish, but it was definitely served my students and hopefully many others. But what I did find early on is that, there was definitely this divide. As Tameka said, I think many of the ed tech companies didn't really, they knew what they wanted to create. They thought they knew what problems they wanted to solve and all of that, but they weren't getting, the input that I think is desperately needed. I'm pleased to say that, I work for a company where that's my entire role, really, is working with teachers and students in order to do that. And Tameka mentioned privacy and such. I'll tell you, that's a huge barrier to entry. And my whole goal is trying to get our products adopted. I could have a million conversations about how great our products are and how great the outcomes for students will be, but if I can't work with teachers to get past that barrier, we're at a dead end. So it's forced me, in a good way, to put a lot of energy into that sort of thing, and that's just one of many examples. But I think one of the other interesting things that I've always found, and this is, when I did try to reach out to these companies, I found early on that they were very happy to hear from teachers and did want that input. There was sort of this gap where I think, teachers wanted to connect with ed tech companies wanted to connect with teachers. Neither of them really knew, spoke the same language. So, a while ago, we actually created an online community called Edtech Bridge, which was for that purpose. It was a Twitter chat back, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago that had specifically brought those two communities together. And I think it was really neat to help them build those relationships. But without that communication, we're, either missing the mark, not meeting the needs, in so many different pitfalls. So it's incredibly, important. And I think it's just important that both sides know that the other side is interested.
Well, I'm going to direct my next question to you then, Gus. So how do you do this? You're at an ed tech company. You want feedback from educators. You recognize its value. How do you pursue this relationship?
Well, before how, it's really why. And unfortunately, there's a dearth of companies out there who are willing to expose themselves and the efficacy of their product to a third party. So when I asked our brilliant co-founders, hey, can we go and engage the University of California, Irvine's Dr. Peppler and her team, they asked me the following question. So they're going to go and conduct real live experiments with human trials in an IRB-controlled way, and even if our intervention is not seen as successful, they're just going to publish it anyway? And I'd answer yes. And it was the conviction of our team. Of course, our company, Merlyn Mine, was founded by the people who ran the IBM Watson for Education lab at IBM Research. And since then, it's just an amazing team. But it was that conviction and that commitment to evidence. We're not going to put a product inside of classrooms that's not going to measurably impact instruction, that's not going to measurably impact student outcomes, et cetera. And we wanted to make sure that during the vital development phase of the product, that we had a partner and a third-party partner who is out there. It is a grotesquely small number how many ed tech companies actually do engage third-party research to do third-party evaluation, especially on the efficacy and impact. But we were ready to do it. Again, because I'm slightly crazy, because there's a lot of conviction around that the product would actually work, and it was an investment that we thought worth doing. So how did we do it? So that's the why. How did we do it? Well, we tried to find deep experts from credible R1 research institutions who had lots of experience researching the impact of ed tech interventions, whether that's in a gaming context, whether it's in a textiles in the classroom context, whether it's in one of the largest and most impactful ed tech apps ever, Scratch. And Dr. Peppler and her team were at Creativity Labs were kind of the perfect partner. But their third leg to that stool was someone who could organize and then later communicate out this innovation. And that was Digital Promise. No offense to Keith Kruger, but my favorite nonprofit, educational innovation nonprofit in the United States is Digital Promise. And the fact that they were able to not only have this thing called the League of Innovative Schools that generates all of this really interesting innovation and then spreads that innovation across the land, if we had that and the very specific, the very rigorous university research led by Dr. Peppler, and then, of course, adding to that, people like Tameka and the rest of her peers on the Practitioner Advisory Board giving us continuous improvement feedback while the entire time engaged in this agile development, continuous feedback in terms of the product development, it equals a product that's so much more rock solid and that we have so much more confidence in. When we go and we speak to school districts or I speak to school boards, we can now cite evidence with large enough ends, with large enough controls, with instrumentation that was created by professionals, not just people who wanted to show that the product was worth X amount of dollars. So the why is really important, and I encourage all ed tech companies out there to do this and to engage in this sort of dangerous activity, which is with these strange people called academic researchers, and then also to do it in the right way and to really put your money where your mouth is in terms of developing products that will be effective either in helping teachers love their jobs more, reducing the stress on teachers of all the technology that's flooded classrooms since COVID, and to downstream improve student outcomes for every student, not just for the rich kids.
Absolutely, thank you for that, and your kind words about Digital Promise especially. We do very much ground our work in equity. We recognize that there is a tremendous gap in the quality of not just education, but in the tools of education that reach our students. And that's something that we're very interested as an organization and are forming our partnerships with in resolving that. So along those lines, I'd like to ask Tameka, how do you determine if an EdTech tool is worth your time? You have to do a fair amount of coaching in your role. I know that there's a certain amount of educator buy-in you need to get. Sometimes you have a choice in that, sometimes not. But how do you determine how to communicate that with your educators?
Well, honestly, my district vets all the tools, obviously. But when we have school building decisions that can be made over what educators should use or can use, we really take a needs assessment of our staff and say, what are the things that we really think that would help you with the work that you already do? So EdTech tools that are, again, aligned with the work that teachers have to do, and it would just make us streamline. One of the things I love to do is see integrations between applications, so where that is easily accessible, it's user-friendly, they can immediately apply it. Those are going to be the tools that we're more likely to say, oh yeah, this goes with this and this goes with that. So we get more buy-in that way.
I can very much appreciate that. Steve, I'd love to hear from your perspective. How does your team approach this in terms of implementation?
Great question. So, well, I'll go back a little bit too to my classroom experience, because to the question that was asked to Tameka also. In my case, I wanted to give my students choice around what tools they were using. So assuming that we can use the tool, I had a lot of, I gave students a lot of power, empowered them in learning what they wanted to use and learn. So they would often be the ones to determine whether it was worth, using the tool in school. And I enjoyed having them do that exploration. One of the challenges I had was in doing that, I was putting a lot of the responsibility of the learning on kids. So there were certain tools that might have a steeper learning curve, and I would want to try to support them the best I could, but that was sometimes a challenge. So it was kind of fortunate that coming to Epic, I had prior had students using Unreal Engine, which is, a lot of people would think has a steep learning curve. So one of the things that we did was we developed a lot of resources that really help to onboard, teachers so that they can very easily use our tools, not be expected to be the expert in the tools, but rather, have the resources to facilitate learning in their classroom. So a lot of the resources we provide, include really student-focused activities, a lot of step-by-step type guidelines, that get the kids learning initially, and then they expand their learning from there. And then another thing that we're doing is a lot of professional development. We're fortunate that our company, believes strongly in education, and our tools happen to be available at no cost. There's no licensing cost to use our tools until you make your first $1 million with something that you publish with it. And I keep thinking I can't wait for the first student to have to struggle with that issue. But and then all of our resources and our training we're able to provide at no cost. So it's really a lot of direct support through, again, resources and training and all of that. So that's what we've been doing. And to bring it back to that first point, that softening the learning curve, I know, when I started, we had great learning resources for people that were already in industry and such. And I wanted to bring it down to a point that, a teacher who wasn't comfortable with the technology, and students who weren't, adept yet, could build those skills. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, I heard you nodding along, Dr. Peppler, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on that, because I know that that's some of the work that your team is kind of surfacing in your research, especially with the Merlyn Mind project.
Oh, yes. Well, within Merlyn Mind, it was amazing. We've been sitting with the numbers, and so we've been, our approach, we've been refining the methodology. So if you're thinking about researchers, you might even have this idea that they move too slow, right? They're going to publish this thing years after this is there. They're not going to answer the right questions that educators would need or that I would need at an industry partner. So we've been, for the past decade and a half, we've really been refining our methodologies to do so. But as we've done so, we sat down with Gus, and he's like, okay, if I'm really interested, does this help to save teachers time? And the answer is yes, it significantly does. Does this lower stress level? And the answer is yes. We kicked off with our study in fall, when everybody kind of thought the pandemic was on the decline, and then the little hairs on our necks kind of went up. We're like, oh my God, the pandemic's starting up, but our teachers are so stressed. Are we gonna get anything? Our control group had this significant, rock bottom, decline in work performance. They had just huge morality, just huge issues in terms of their ability to their work performance overall. And in the Merlyn Mind group, it was this protective effect, right? And you see them soldiering on. They felt like it saved them time, even outside of the school day, right? And so, just knowing that, but we didn't derive those questions because the literature told us to, right? We derived those questions because those were the right questions to ask, both because they come from the educators, they're rooted in what the industry partner needs to be able to talk to, the educators and administrators, and kind of bringing that together in quick pace, right? So a lot of researchers do move slowly, and we're working on this new RPIP methodologies so that people can start to move more quickly and really start to service the needs of all three sectors.
Thanks for that. Gus, I'm wondering if your team, did you notice any sort of question? Was there any concern about engaging this? Because as Kylie mentioned, there is an additional lead time. I can appreciate as a startup, you're eager to get to market, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about that process and maybe the dynamics within your team on that.
Yeah, for sure. We have as I mentioned earlier, an incredible team. One of the people that are on our sub team to work with UCI, wrote a book on signals intelligence, right? It's an amazing group. But I think what they found most valuable about the University of California at Irvine relationship was kind of a different take, an academic take, a more rigorous take, perhaps on the mixed methods insights. We can rip telemetry off of devices, of course, anonymously all day and see who uses what, when, and for what purpose, but we don't necessarily know why. So that texture, the rich texture that can only come from mixed methods research is what was delivered by UCI and delivered over time in a variety of contexts. And it absolutely helped support the development of our product, right? One of the first things that we saw or that UCI reported was some teachers are actually going to let their students use this digital assistant. So Merlyn is the first digital assistant for teachers, if you hear us talk about Merlyn, in a private and secure environment that was designed just around teacher workflows. But what Kylie's team saw was something that she now is calling co-orchestration, where students and teachers are working together with a digital assistant, and it's mind-blowing. The amount of times that Merlyn is used in our pilot classrooms is like 10 or 15x what a typical digital assistant is used in a home. And it's because it's domain specific, it's tuned to the language of education, so the language, the automatic speech recognition is what teachers say. It's hundreds of thousands of hours of what teachers say, not what normal people say. And then perhaps more interestingly, it's contextually aware, which means that it knows what the teacher is doing in that moment and surfaces the next best action, given all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of hours of data that we have. But when you combine that with rigorous university research that has a firewall and that can be bad or can be good, it is what it is, then you have something that is supercharged development. Supercharged development where we can have confidence around the eventual impact in classrooms, and that shows up in the numbers, even at non-UCI pilot sites that we have. So really, really interesting, and I would say that being able to deploy high-quality university researchers, in addition to a very talented R&D and agile development team, equals something that's much more than the sum of its parts. Something that I can go and confidently say to a chief information officer or a superintendent or a chief academic officer, or most importantly of all, a teacher, and say, yes, this will save you time. Yes, this will limit your techno stress or frustration. And yes, we know from Learn Platform that 1,440, I think, is the number of average apps used by districts now post-COVID. We can help teachers get back above water. And now we can say that with conviction because we have proof. And that's something that's all too rare in EdTech.
Thank you. I would love to hear, Steve, a little bit about what you're doing at Epic and what your role in that is in terms of, and what kind of relationship you have with researchers now. And I would also like to know, too, especially in terms of gaming, how much does the research matter?
Great question. So in terms of research, I mean, one of the things we did before we got, really involved in education was we worked with Burning Glass and had them write a data-driven report called Visualizing the Future. And that gave us a great starting point in terms of at least what the needs and the demands are for these skills. Now we're at an interesting place, and I might have to meet with Kylie later, where we are starting to, implement our plan of providing resources, providing training, and our goal is adoption in the classroom. So we want to now start to follow up and see, after, because we're at this interesting place. Like the intent for teachers is that they will be able to use our tools in the classroom. There are barriers, so we're trying to work through those. So it'll be great in a year. This year our goal is to train over 700 teachers. We do a 30-hour professional development experience. So if anybody's interested, we could talk later. And we don't charge for it. So we're doing a lot of training, and now it'll be very interesting to see in, next year, how impactful that was and how we need to adjust. So I would love for us to get, a little more involved on that side in research. On a company level, there's, I wouldn't even begin to know, all of the R&D that's happening. But in education, we're a very small team, and my goal is working directly with teachers, building that community, and and rolling out, and supporting them. So it almost, in a lot of ways, feels like we're at a grassroots point right now. But time will definitely tell. And to be honest, the growth of the need for people to fill these jobs has increased by like 600%, in the last year. So there's no doubt that there's the need. Now it's how do we, adopt in the classroom and get that through.
So Tameka, Gus mentioned over 1,400 apps in schools right now. How do you decide what's worth your time? We talked a little bit about the vetting process from the district level, of course, but we all know that apps happen. Students pick up things. They happen a little bit more virally than that. So how do you determine not just what apps are worth your time, but then also, say an edtech startup comes to you, they say, hey, we have this great product, it's gonna improve your students' coding skills, it's gonna, give you these improvements. How do you determine what's worth your time to take on?
I think I would have to piggyback off of Gus. Honestly, what it means to be a 21st century highly qualified teacher today is totally different than when those terms were coined. And so for my students to be contributing members of society, I want to be on the edge of whatever is new, whatever is hot, so that I can transfer those skills to their teachers can pass it on to them, but that they can also be competitive. They're ready for college, they're ready for career. So it goes beyond me, it goes beyond, the use that I would have for it. If it's something that I believe the students would not otherwise have access to, definitely, let me do it. Right? And so for me, that's the biggest thing. What are the tools that can help me amplify the voices of the unheard and the ones that need that access?
Thank you for that. And I guess I'm going to kind of throw maybe a curveball at you, Kylie, and that's wondering, so we've talked about the RPIP model a little bit. Where do students fit into this dynamic? And in terms of research, in terms of next steps, where do you see their voices in your work?
The students?
Yeah, the voice of students, yeah.
In many ways, I think about them along with the educator, right? And so, we reach out to, and this could be educators in and out of school. So we work in both sectors, really. But the feedback that we're getting, and the teachers representing what they're seeing in the classroom, right? As you're talking to a teacher, Scratch was a success because the kids wanted it, right? Merlyn is equally as exciting, the Symphony Classroom is equally exciting to the students. Like, they're very intrigued by what this means to have AI in the classroom and the conversation that's there. And so it becomes emblematic, right, for what it means for a teacher to sort of bring in that innovation. And so when we say educators, really, it's a proxy for what that means and the multiple perspectives and even the families behind that, right? And so because our educators are so in tune with the families and so forth. But I did want to mention that a lot of this came out of the dark side of EdTech industry, right? We were at the EdTech Efficacy Symposium many years back. Our own research started taking us, and a lot of times I just wanted to be able to say this new thing was as good as the traditional thing that was in the classrooms. What do you find in the biology lab, in the chemistry lab, in the technology we were using, the LMS, and so often when we started doing those comparisons, the status quo actually failed miserably, right? Didn't lead to any significant gains, didn't transform the classroom in the way that we had all thought. And even those of us that had been using these technologies, right? And I just kind of thought to myself, it's just really interesting that we don't push ourselves to ask that question. And I think for all of you that are innovating, that there's so much value add. I mean, I think you can fail faster when you know all of the insights that have been gleaned in the research. You shouldn't have to do that work yourself, right? You can ask your research partners to give you summary briefs of that, so that you don't make the same mistakes. That even just bringing educators into the fold. That sounds so easy, right? At Epic Games, that's not easy, right? You've got your programmers, you've got your designers, right? And they've got a really clear vision. So how do they really truly listen, especially to some of the mistakes that are there? So you have to kind of build the company differently to do so. And you have to kind of start to think about the questions you want to be able to ask, the claims you want to be able to make. And so when we start to kind of peel back the onion on that, there's a lot of I think we all do it, right? There's a lot of space for innovation. There's a lot of ways to move the needle, and can you start to make it really clear as you start to go and talk to administrators, not just to make the sale, but really to steward the next generation of education. I see so many really good innovations actually die on the vine, not because they weren't good, but because they didn't have somebody really making strong arguments for them, and the status quo will just keep coming back, right? Once somebody has invested in something, this could be hardware, this could be software, the teacher training, it always sounds so insurmountable. So to try the new thing and to try it at scale and to get behind it is very hard. And so, you need to be able to really make strong arguments to be able to do that.
That leads, I guess, to the natural segue over to Gus, because I think you're very much an advocate not just for your product, but also for the experience of educators and the experience of districts. So, I guess, what would you share with, putting yourself into administrators' shoes, educators' shoes, and figuring out how do you kind of get into their mindset and figure out how can you make that, I don't want to say pitch, but make that argument for a quality product?
One of the key ingredients of my mental instability is that I have an angel and a demon on either shoulder, right? I have an MBA and a doctorate in education, so I kind of understand how both sides think, or at least profess to. What's really exciting about the Merlyn Digital Assistant is that it can show these research-based outcomes that are going to make a difference for superintendents at a time where the teaching profession is what the kids now these days would refer to as a dumpster fire, right? We have 54% of teachers trying to leave the profession. We have some crazy number of teachers who moonlight because they're not paid enough. And we're in a situation where things aren't getting better after COVID, it's getting worse because so much is expected of teachers. Teach for America recruitment is at an all-time low. Now is not the time to try and replace teachers with AI or to further alienate this valued profession, or the profession that should be valued a hell of a lot more in the United States and globally. So when we think about the opportunity to create AI technology, that at the absolute vanguard of AI and of innovation for artificial intelligence writ large, and then deploy it to help support this crucial workforce of teachers when we know that they need it most, that is an exciting proposition. And then to be able to go into the pilots, the pilots that are studied by UCI under the auspices of the UCIRB, or our own pilots that are separate and distinct, and then to see the teacher's reaction, that they're going to stay in the profession, that they're able to have more time back so that they can, more personalized learning, so they can free themselves from the front of the freaking classroom and get and start to teach students from wherever they want, to endow this sense of freedom, the sense of freedom physically, so that they get away from the front of the classroom, and intellectually, so that they can teach the way that they want to teach. This isn't teach by numbers. It's not a new tool. It's not a new app. The last thing teachers freaking need is a new app. It's a way to unlock the utility of the tech and the content they already use in a way that gives them time back, in a way that endows them with freedom, and hopefully, in a long tail perspective, help heal the teacher workforce. That's what we want to do. And I think given this opportunity, and then given that the evidence suggests in a significant way in some cases that this will make a difference, what an amazing opportunity. And then to be able to do that and to create shared value both from an investor community as well as from generating this like massive public good, yes, like this is an opportunity of a lifetime.
Thank you. How does that sound, Tameka?
It sounds great.
You know, Tameka, there's a room where I used to be in sales. Don't believe it.
Well, no, this is a chance to kind of surface, Tameka, your work on this educator advisory board that you're doing with Merlyn, and part of your role is, of course, you know, you're going to have the opportunity to test out the product and give everything like that. But there is also this sense of opening up, perhaps, and maybe this is the question: is there going to be a chance to kind of open up the ways that education happens in the classroom? And I think that's something that there's tremendous potential there, but then there's tremendous, question mark. You know, you've been an educator for 15 plus years. How does that feel to you? I mean, in all honesty, because this is a significant change, and there have been studies about AI, and there's a little bit of pushback around it, and we see it with gaming too. The people are just a little bit skeptical because education is going to look different. But how do we get folks on board, and how do we kind of cultivate that idea of trust and collaboration?
I think one of the things that I always tell my teachers, we need first good instruction, right? And so no ed tech tool that we're using will replace, we're not looking to replace the teacher, but you said it so beautifully, unlock the utility. So, the teacher's got to have classroom management. The teacher has to have expectations. And so if you have these ed tech professionals and folks who are training, they can continue to elevate that you're still the teacher. You still have to have your expectations, but to show them how they can do teaching and learning in a different way. For example, my school, our instructional focus is to have small group instruction. There's research behind how this highly impacts our impacted students. And so if I think about my teacher who before didn't have a co-teacher, needed to teach these small group of students a specific skill, but the rest of the class needed to do something else, well, that gives the teacher a little bit more freedom and autonomy to make sure that the kids are all on task with whatever they were supposed to do. So we would just need to continue to let folks know, like, we still need good instruction. You still have to do expectations with your kids, let them know what to expect. When you are with me, you're not talking to Merlyn. When you're there, you can talk to, things like that, right? So just understanding that it has to be very explicit on how it can look. And then as folks get comfortable, they can venture out and tailor it.
Thanks. Steve, do you have anything to add to that? 'Cause that's very much your bailiwick there.
Yeah, well, you had also mentioned about like gaming and whether or not how people feel about gaming in the classroom and that sort of thing. First off, we're talking a lot about like when we talk about things like the metaverse and such, everything that's coming is being built on game technology, right? So for one, and the jobs in not just gaming by any means, but the industries that are being impacted by this technology are things like advertising, fashion, automotive, TV, film. So if we're giving kids these skills, I think that's where we pitch from, is that we want them to have career opportunities. We want them to be exposed to these different industry experiences, and oftentimes it becomes an alternate pathway even for many kids that might not necessarily be intending on going to college. So we're really preparing them with true skills. We're working with a group in California, the Arts, Media, and Entertainment Workforce Development Initiative, and they're doing amazing work where they're getting kids these skills in high school, and they already have industry partners ready to review portfolios and hire paid apprentices, these students that graduate from high school with these skills. And this is happening in underserved, underrepresented areas, and we just and we've been fortunate to be working closely with them. So, again, this is where we can support the teachers, train them, and then they go into the classroom and teach. So I think it's just important. And then, another thing, and it refers back to, like the Burning Glass report, in that, when you look at, the need for these positions, there is a huge gap in people to fill these positions. So we're moving away from gaming as just this thing to like all of these different, industries and all of the job opportunities, and that's where, a huge need to be filled is. So I think that helps overcome that part for sure.
No, that's thank you for that. And I do think the narrative around gaming is changing. I think people are recognizing the ability to solve problems, and we were talking a little bit about creativity before the panel began, and I think we're all sort of applying our creative juices into different ways. So I'll kick it back to you, Kylie. So what's next for projects? I mean, when does the research end? Does it end?
There's no end in sight in this, but in terms of the policy of the work, I really am excited that there are new companies, new industry partners that are really at the table to kind of say we want to make the things that educators want, that kids want at the table, and in our own work we are we're kind of the next stage of our work. We're looking at a lot of different things. We're trying to innovate in higher education. We've got kind of new ways of doing computer science in the undergraduate curriculum that are bubbling up. The RPIP model is something we're digging into with an array of partners. And you'll never know what to expect out of the creativity labs, really.
What about you, Gus?
Well, we're looking for additional pilot school districts. So if there's anyone in here that represents a school district that would like to pilot Merlyn, the first digital assistant for teachers, we're all ears, so please see me afterwards. We love our pilot districts, and it's a true partnership that, again, lifelong friends have resulted as, I can't guarantee that every time, but we would love to talk to interested school districts.
What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I have one other thing too, like with the community of educators that we've been developing. We have, for those of you who are familiar with Discord, we have a Discord server with over 1,600 educators that have somehow over the last year kind of found us and been interested in this technology. And those are the people that are informing everything. Like, I know what people's pain points are from having those interactions. When we do training, we can get that. So again, I think it really does come back to the incredible importance of listening to, teachers and allowing them to feel heard. I mean, on my side, I know what teachers want. Development might not be as fast as we all want, but our development team hears it because I let them know every time I hear another request from a teacher for the same thing, so progress gets made, but it does take time.
Thank you. And what about you, Tameka? What do you want to see next as a coach, as an educator, as an innovator in this edtech space?
Hey, if you have a tool you'd like me to try out, contact me.
It's very thoughtful. Well, thank you all to our panelists. This has been so informative. I really appreciate your time. This art pit model is evolving. This evolves out of a panel that one of my colleagues facilitated last year. And it's just really interesting to see not just how Merlyn has evolved as a product, but how I'm sure the research has evolved, how our educator board has evolved, and how we're all kind of continuing to work together, and look forward to hopefully addressing this issue. So thank you everyone for your time and for your attention.